Hello, I'm Kerry O'Shea Gorgone with Appfire. Welcome to the best project portfolio management show by Appfire. Today, we're going to talk with Michelle Bartonico about how to keep your project on track when there's stakeholders involved.
You've got questions about PPM, but you're afraid to ask? Well, wait no longer. Appfire presents the best project portfolio management show by Appfire.
Thanks so much for joining, Michelle. Did I say your name correctly or not? It's okay to correct me.
No, you did. Thanks.
Okay. It occurred to me. So you're senior strategist and project manager at Trinity University and an advisor to the president and the executive leadership team, certified project management professional, PMP. It's safe to say you know a little something about working with stakeholders. So how do I keep stakeholders from sinking my project? Not to put too fine a point on it.
Well, the first thing to know, I think, is that stakeholders are just people. And though sometimes as project managers, we like to be ultra organized, put people into little boxes and hope that all of our to-dos are checked off nicely and neatly. And that's just not how stakeholders function. They've got lives outside of work, and they've got lives in politics at work. And those are things that we can sometimes anticipate and sometimes not. And, the thing that I've learned is when I approach a project, I think about it in kind of two planes. One is the external information and tools that I have, and then one is internal things that I use for myself in order to make sure that I feel like I'm approaching a situation or a meeting or a particular person or set of people appropriately. So for external, I mean things that you would normally give to your project team, whether that's your internal project team or your clients. And those are things like your project charter. And those are things that help you manage expectations with them and then make sure that everybody is aligned with the goals. I know that that's not necessarily part of this conversation, but project charter to make sure everyone is on the same
So
page.
first, have a project charter.
Have a project charter. Yes, have a project charter. That would be great. And then once you have that, make sure that everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are. That really is number one, because once that is outlined for everyone, you have something objective to go off of. It's not subjective where I feel like I know this particular information more, or I feel like I should be the approver. Pause. If something like that happens, go back, have a meeting. What I would say about those types of situations is be aware that you're going to have to pivot throughout the project. And again, that's because people are people. And sometimes we just genuinely forget that we signed a project charter, or we forget that this person XYZ is supposed to be involved.
I mean, especially for longer term projects that can take a year to 18 months to complete.
Absolutely. And especially with that, when you've got a higher risk of maybe turnover or people changing positions or getting pulled on a different project if that resource is no longer available. That happens quite often on kind of the marketing side of project management because we're tackling a lot of projects at once. We don't always have long-term projects. We have campaigns. And so a campaign will ebb and flow. And once it sunsets, we might have 14 other projects that we're working on of various scales. So
maybe it's like you've worked in this field for a while. What about internal things?
So the internal things that I think about are, I always put together a stakeholder matrix. And what that is it essentially kind of, you do your best to assess based on either previous conversations with people, what you know about their title, their position, their influence, and just talking with other people. If you've been in an organization for a while, you've got some institutional knowledge, but if you haven't, talk to people, ask them questions. When you know the goal of a project, you can ask someone, hey, why are you interested in this project? What does it mean to you? Why would this be important for you to complete this project or meet this goal? And as they're talking about that, it'll start to help you understand how much skin in the game they have and how much it would help them potentially to have the project goal met. And then you start kind of plotting people on this little matrix about how much influence or interest do they have in the project. And that's not something that you necessarily share externally with your clients, but it is something that I always try to keep a pulse on because I think all of us have had some unruly clients or people kind of just parachuting in to a project, and you're like, hold on, you're really loud, but you actually don't have any influence, but you have a whole lot of interest, and that's really great. And I applaud that, but we're just going to kind of not have individual meetings with you because our time is finite, and I'm going to find another way to engage with you because we need to keep moving with the people who have the approving authority.
Parachuting in. So what are the most common pitfalls project managers run into then in relation to working with stakeholders? Besides the parachuting in with no influence.
Besides the parachuting in with no influence. Not anticipating all the stakeholders. So it's not that somebody parachuted in, you just didn't know they existed. That has definitely happened to me before, where there was a really key person and you do a discovery meeting, you try to fact find as much as possible. You ask people who you know are on the project team, okay, who exactly are you going to send this to? Who's going to be approving this? And they tell you what you think is all the information. And then you get partway into the project and you figure out, I'm not going to use a name because somebody's actual name is going to pop into my head first, but you're going to go to a certain part of the project, and then this person's going to seemingly pop out of the woodwork. And what I would say in that instance, just be empathetic, because they probably thought that you knew they were there the whole time. And so don't act particularly surprised, but definitely ask the questions at that point. Hey, I didn't realize that at this point you were going to be involved. Are there any other points in the project you're going to be involved in? Would you like to be part of milestones? Would you like to be added to our weekly meetings, our scrums? Start asking them, and then re-verify that information with your project charter, and make sure that if any updates need to happen, that you actually update that charter. And that is one of the biggest pitfalls I see, where people maybe don't anticipate somebody on the project. There's a lot of pivoting that happens, and then there's no reconciliation of the documents, where you don't go back to your project charter and say, Bob is now on this and he's an approving authority. And you have to have that level of transparency across your project, especially like you said, if it's a year long, 18 months, people have to know who all the players are.
When you were talking about that exchange, I was thinking that emotional intelligence has to be pretty important in working with stakeholders. So how important is that to keeping things running?
I would say that one of the other big pitfalls that I see with project managers is that oftentimes, again, we think of stakeholders not as people, but as just players on a board. And we just don't work like that. And so emotional intelligence, finding your style, I think is also really important. I won't get into this particular soapbox, but I think as women, it's especially important, depending on the industry that you're working in, to have a style and a presence about you. And, learning about yourself is important through emotional intelligence as well. And that would be a skill that I would definitely recommend people concentrate on. I would concentrate a little bit on, obviously, the mechanics of knowing what a project charter is and what tools you have in your toolbox. But above all, people have to like you. People have to want to work with you. People have to see that you are helping them stay organized in a way that is nuanced and not completely rule-oriented to where it's so rigid that it doesn't give. And so emotional intelligence is one of the absolutely key pieces of this. And then the other thing I would say is just the art of persuasion. How do you genuinely work with people, but also learn compromise, learn influence, and then just learn how to move something forward when you've got a little bit of a sticking point?
I think you got to know where your bread is buttered. Like Chris Brogan, who's chief of staff at Appfire, where I also work, says some people find it hard asserting their authority when they're managing resources that don't report to them. Like you talked a little bit about this, if you don't actually have authority. How do you maintain your authority in those moments?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if you're plotting your own stakeholder matrix and you're not actually on, you're at high interest and not high influence, that can be a little tricky. One of the best things to do, if you can do it, of course, this is the ideal scenario, is when you are setting up your project charter, see if you have an executive sponsor who does have that level of interest and influence. And then in that initial kickoff meeting, see if you can get that person in the room with you. And then at key milestones, again, pull that person back in, or see if you can set up a monthly or quarterly, depending on the project milestones, see if you can set up a checkpoint with that executive sponsor so that when you do come back to report to your project team, they know that you are in constant communication with that level of person. And that might be an actual executive, that might be your director, that might be a functional lead, but certainly it would be somebody who has that more of an influence than you do per that question. And I would just think about ways to keep others who have that level of influence really involved, even if it's passively, like a memo, and then letting the team know that that's what has been transpiring, so that they also see you as a way to carry their voice to that level of person, so that, again, you're a conduit between the two groups and not just an order taker of a project team, but you're also speaking on their behalf. And so you're seen as more of an advocate, not just a rule maker and somebody who is going to just grind it to the end.
Michelle Bartonico, thanks so much for joining us, and come back another time because we have a lot more to talk about on the best project portfolio management show by Appfire. You can catch other episodes at appfire.com.
Thank you.